Hi, I'm Susan Rutledge, and in this video I'm going to teach you how I create color sheets using pattern brushes in Adobe Illustrator. These pattern brushes were created with the computer. They're look-alike Doodle Art, but I didn't have to use a pen and paper. I've used the tools and the lines and the objects that Illustrator offers. In parts 1 and 2 of creating look-alike Doodle Art pattern brushes, we created all of these designs and all of these pattern brushes, and I'm going to be using some of those designs in this video. I've also added a few extra. I want you to notice that wherever there is an opportunity, there's a white fill on these pattern brushes. I haven't left any closed objects empty, or I haven't used any dark colors. And that's because when I create the color pages, I want to be able to have something for people to color, but when I overlap the pattern brushes, I don't want you to be able to see through them. Now, if you have a design that needs to have a color changed, let me show you how you can do that. I'll open up the brushes panel, and this is one of the designs we created in a previous video. I just press down on the design and drag it out. Then I'm going to select it and ungroup it, keyboard shortcut Shift Command G, and then I'm going to select the corner tile and delete it because we're not going to be working with it. We're going to just change this little guy here. I'll get the direct selection tool, keyboard shortcut A, and I'll click here, go to the properties panel, and change the fill to white. Go back to the brushes panel and get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V. Select the design, drag and drop it in, choose pattern brush, say OK, and that's all you have to do. Now I'm going to cancel this out because I've already created that, and press the delete key and recenter my artboard, keyboard shortcut Command 0. One other thing that I want you to notice is that on my ellipse and on my outside frame, the pattern brush is resting right on the stroke instead of being centered on the stroke, which is the default for pattern brushes. And the way to do that is to create a bounding box that changes the spacing and tells Illustrator where to put it. So again, I'm going to move this out of the way, and I'm going to drag out a design here, and we'll select it and ungroup it, keyboard shortcut Shift Command G. Then I'll get the ellipse tool, keyboard shortcut L, and drag this out, and I'm going to apply this pattern brush so you can see what we're doing. So it's centered here on the stroke rather than resting on the stroke. I'll select the design. It has a bounding box around it, and I need to delete that, so I'm going to have to ungroup first. Keyboard shortcut Shift Command G, and then I'll select the bounding box and delete it. And I'm going to move into the outline viewing mode, keyboard shortcut Command Y, and grab hold of the design and hold down the Shift and the Option keys and drag a copy straight down, and when they intersect, I'm going to release my mouse. And if you're not seeing the word intersect, go up to View, down to Smart Guides, and click Smart Guides, and that's keyboard shortcut Command U. Now then I'm going to deselect this, and I'll create my bounding box, which is going to tell Illustrator how to make the spacing. So let's open up the properties panel here and get the rectangle tool, keyboard shortcut M. The bounding box needs to be invisible, so I'm going to remove the fill color, and then I'm going to remove the stroke. I'll start at the top left, making sure that I get all of the left side of the design in the top, and then drag down and include the bottom and the right side, and then release my mouse. And this bounding box has got to be behind the design, so I'll move it using the keyboard shortcut Shift Command left bracket. Then get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and I can delete this copy now because I don't need it. And we'll move into the preview mode again, keyboard shortcut Command Y. What we have now is a bounding box that is twice as high as the design. So when Illustrator centers the bounding box on the stroke, it's going to look like it's sitting on the stroke. let's group these together, keyboard shortcut Command G, and I'll open the brushes panel, and I'm going to drag this in and drop it and say pattern brush and say OK. And I'll call this edited half black circle and say OK. I'll select this ellipse where the pattern brush is centered on the stroke, but when we go to the edited half black circle, it has moved and now it's sitting right on the ellipse. That's what I do with any of my pattern brushes that have a flat edge. All right, let's just delete these and recenter the artboard, keyboard shortcut Command 0. Now for the size of my color sheet, I make 8 by 10 inch color books, and so I allow a 1/2 inch on the outside edges and 1 inch on the inside edge. If you're going to be printing individual sheets, then just make sure you have the same margin all the way around, and also understand what the margins of your printer are so that you don't cut off part of your design. Now let's move into a document I've already set up. This is the color sheet that we're going to be making, and I have already created my 6.5 by 9 inch border. And if we go over to the properties panel, you can see that it has a white fill and a 0.75 point stroke, and I've added guides to help me know where center is. Okay, I'm going to select the rectangle and we're going to make a copy. I'll use the keyboard shortcut Command C, and then I'm going to paste it right in front. So I'll use the keyboard shortcut Command F. And on the copy, which is selected now, I'm going to remove the fill color, and I'll explain why later. And we're going to leave the stroke the same, and then come over to the brushes panel, and we'll select this pattern brush, and we have our frame. Now let's get the ellipse tool, keyboard shortcut L, and click on the artboard one time to open up the ellipse dialog box. I'll type in 5.25 inches for the width, press the tab key and type in 2.75 inches for the height, and say OK. And then get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V. I'm going to drag our ellipse over and center it on our guides. Now I'll move over to the left toolbar, and I'm going to press down and hold on the pen tool, and that brings up a pop-up menu. I'll come down and choose anchor point tool, which is keyboard shortcut Shift C, and I'm going to click on the left anchor and click on the right anchor, and then I'll get the direct selection tool, keyboard shortcut A. I want to round both of these corners. This corner is already selected. I'll hold down the Shift key and choose this other anchor as well. And then I'm going to drag a handle to the center, and let's drag it to about 0.22 inches. And then I'll let up on the mouse and I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V. And with it still selected, I'm going to go ahead and choose the pattern brush. Now there are actually 2 pattern brushes that look like they are applied to this ellipse, and that's really not possible. So what we're going to do is look for the one that's in back first, and that would be this one here. I'll click on this, and let's come over to the properties panel, and we're going to leave the stroke at 1 point. Next, I'm going to make a copy of this ellipse. I'll use the keyboard shortcut Command C and then paste it in front using the keyboard shortcut Command F. And while this copy is selected, I'll go over and open the brushes panel, and I'm going to select this smaller pattern brush, the one that goes on top of that previous one, and then we'll open the properties panel and change the stroke to 0.75. And that's how you make it look like you have 2 pattern brushes that are on the same stroke. With my top stroke still selected, I'll come up to Object, Path, Offset Path, and I'm going to create an offset path of -0.3 inches and say OK. And then I'll open the brushes panel, and we're going to choose this pattern brush right here. So we'll click here, and then I'll click on the artboard to deselect it. Now I'm ready to fill in the center with the word love. So I'm going to get the Type tool, keyboard shortcut T, and come over to the Properties panel. I'm using Coniferous Bold. And this is a font that I downloaded from Adobe Fonts. You can use any kind of heavy rounded font if you're going to be applying a pattern brush to it. So I'm going to click on the artboard, and with it still selected, I'm going to just type love and get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and move it down here, center it on the artboard, and then come over to the Properties panel and choose Create Outlines. I'm going to change the fill to white and the stroke to 1 point black. Next, I'll open the Brushes panel so we can apply this little rounded pattern brush to the letters. And this is another example of how I had to create a bounding box so that my pattern brush is right along that stroke line. So we'll come over here and choose the pattern brush and then move to the Properties panel. And I'll reduce the size of the stroke to 0.5 points. I notice we don't have an inner corner tile here, and I'm going to have to fix that. So let's come over to the Brushes panel and double click on the pattern brush. I have an outer corner tile in the first bin. In the third bin, we make the inner corner tile. So I'll twirl down here and I'll choose Auto Sliced here and say OK and apply it to strokes. And now the pattern brush is going all the way around all the letters. Before we go on, I'm going to open up the Layers panel and I'll select each of these items. I'm holding down the Shift key, and then I'm going to group them together, keyboard shortcut Command G, and we're going to name this Center, and click on the artboard to deselect this. Next, I'll get the Line Segment tool, keyboard shortcut / and click on the artboard to open up the Line Segment tool options dialog box. I'm going to type in 8.8 inches and I'll say OK. I'll move to the Properties panel, and there's no fill and it's 0.75 stroke. I'll get the Selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and I'm going to move it over and center it. I'm kind of looking where that other one is. It's just a little left of center of that first little loop here. Then I'll hold down the Shift and the Option key, and I'm going to make a copy 1/2 inch to the right. With that still selected, I'll duplicate that move several more times. Command D, Command D, Command D, Command D, and just keep typing that until I get all the way over to the other edge. And then with this last one selected, I'm going to come up to Select, Same Appearance. And that selects all of my vertical lines, and then I can use my arrow key and move over until I have these centered. And I'm just going to eyeball this. Then I'll click on the artboard to deselect it. Now I'm going to start with the first line and select it, hold down my Shift key, skip one, and go to the next. And I'm going to select every other line. And then come over and open the Brushes panel, and I'm going to select the Rope Pattern Brush. Now, if you'd like to learn how to make this design and create this pattern brush, check out my video on creating rope pattern brushes in Adobe Illustrator. All right, we're going to add a different pattern brush to these other lines. I'm going to hold my Shift key down and select each one of those. And then we'll select this pattern brush, and let's come up to the Properties panel, and I'm going to reduce that to 0.75 points, and then I'm going to come back and hold the Shift key down, and we'll select these ropes again. Once I've got these selected, I'm going to group them together using the keyboard shortcut Command G, and then move over into the Layers panel, and I'm going to rename this group Lines. Now here's where you see why I wanted that extra frame that didn't have a fill in it. I wanted to be able to move my lines down under that rectangle so the pattern brush on that frame would hide the edges of my vertical lines. That front frame works great, and it allows me to still have a background that does have a fill in it, and that's important to have. Now I have a little bit of a problem here. This is looking pretty messy, and I'm going to open up my center grouping, and I'm going to choose my very back ellipse, and I'll select it, come over to the Properties panel, and I'm going to give that a white fill. And then we'll go back to the Layers panel, and that looks much better. So anytime you see something coming through, just go to the very back object and give it a white fill. Now let's move on to the next item. I'll get the ellipse tool, keyboard shortcut L, and click on the artboard, and this time we're going to type in 4.75 for the width, press the tab key, and type in 6.5 inches for the height, and then say OK. Then I'll get the anchor point tool, keyboard shortcut Shift C, and click on the top anchor and the bottom anchor, and then get the direct selection tool, keyboard shortcut A, and hold the Shift key down and select that top anchor. The bottom one is already selected. Then I'll drag this handle down about 0.22 inches and release my mouse. And then I'll move this object over and center it on the artboard. And when I have it in place, I'm going to release the mouse. I'm going to close the center objects up, and I'm going to select this path we just created and drag it under the center. And now it is behind this first set of designs we created. Then I'll come over to the Brushes panel, and we're going to add the same pattern brushes to this. So we'll first select this larger one and then copy it, keyboard shortcut Command C, and then paste in front, keyboard shortcut Command F, and choose this pattern brush and come to the Properties panel and change that to 0.75. And then with our second pattern brush selected, I'll come up to Object, Path, Offset Path, and we're going to offset this minus 0.5 inches and say OK. And then we're going to repeat that. Object, Path, Offset Path. And Illustrator remembers our last setting, so all I have to do is say OK. Then let's come to the Layers panel, and I'll hold down the Shift key and I'll select these 4 ellipses here, and I'll group them, keyboard shortcut Command G. Now I'm noticing that my border around my frame is larger on the right side than the left side. So I'm going to select my border, and I'll come over to the Properties panel, and I'm going to reduce this to 0.75. Next, I'll get the Rectangle tool, keyboard shortcut M, and click on the artboard to open up the rectangle dialog box. I'm going to type in 1.1, press the tab key, and then type 1.1, and we'll say OK. And we're going to give this a white fill, and we'll leave the stroke at 0.75. And I'll rotate this using the Rotate tool, keyboard shortcut R. I'll hold the Shift key down and rotate to a 45-degree angle. I'll move my artboard over a little bit so I have some room here. I'll get the Selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and move this out here and go to the Brushes panel. And we're going to choose this little pattern brush here. And in the Properties panel, let's move this to 0.75. And then with this selected, I'm going to come up to Object, Path, Offset Path, and we're going to use an offset of minus 0.25 inches and say OK. And then after we have that done, we're going to make a little flower to go in the center. I'll get the Ellipse tool, keyboard shortcut L, and click on the artboard to open the Ellipse dialog box. I'll type in 0.2 inches for the width, press the tab key, and type in 0.3 inches for the height and say OK. Then get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and we'll rotate this using the rotate tool, keyboard shortcut R. I need to click on that bottom anchor to move the rotate ball, and then hold down the shift and the option keys, and that's going to rotate this petal 90 degrees and make an exact copy. I'll release my mouse and duplicate that move using the keyboard shortcut Command D, and then again Command D. Now I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and select the 4 petals and group them, keyboard shortcut Command G, and then rotate this group, getting the rotate tool, keyboard shortcut R, and I'll hold the shift and the option key down again and drag 45 degrees and release my mouse. Once again, I'll get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V. I'll select all of the petals, come over to the Properties panel, and under Pathfinder, I'm going to click on Click to Unite. And that gives me my little flower. Now we need a center, so I'll get the ellipse tool again, keyboard shortcut L, click on the artboard to open the ellipse dialog box, and I'm going to type in 0.25, press the tab key, and then 0.25, and say OK, and get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and I'll center that and group it, keyboard shortcut Command G, and then I'm going to resize this object, transform, scale, and we're going to go ahead and scale that at 75%, and we're not going to scale corners or strokes and effects, and say OK. Then let's move this up in the center here and select all of the design and the flower and group everything together using the keyboard shortcut Command G. I'm going to move this over and we're going to place it, kind of eyeball this, and let's recenter the artboard, keyboard shortcut Command 0. Now I can use my up arrow key and kind of nudge that in place. Then I'll hold the shift and the option keys down and drag a copy over to the right side. And when I have that where I want it, I'll grab this other design, hold the shift and option keys down again, and drag this to the bottom. And there, I think we'll leave it right there. And then I'll click on the artboard to deselect. I seem to have more space at the bottom than I do at the top, so I'm going to click on this design here, and sure enough, here is the center. So I'm going to arrow down. There we go, and that's why I have my guides here. And that looks much better. Now for our last step, I'll get the pen tool, keyboard shortcut P. I'll click in the center of the left flower, and then I'll click in the center of the right flower and get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and I'll come over to the left toolbar, and I'm going to get the curvature tool, and that's keyboard shortcut Shift Accent, and I'll place my little pen right in the center of this line, and I'm going to drag up. Now I don't want a fill on here, so let me get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V, and we'll remove that fill. And then we're going to come to the brushes panel, and I'll choose my pattern brush here, and we're going to the properties panel and reduce that to 0.75. And then open the layers panel, and I need my arched leaves pattern brush to be behind these designs, so I'll just grab it and I'm going to drag it down underneath these designs, and then I'm going to make a copy. So with it still selected, I'll hold down the shift and option keys and just drag it down below, and then come over to the left toolbar, and the rotate tool is showing. That's this little rounded arrow. I'll press and hold, and that allows me to choose the reflect tool, keyboard shortcut O, from the pop-out menu, and once it's selected, I'll double click it, and that opens the reflect dialog box. Horizontal is already checked, so I'm just going to say OK, and then I'll use my arrow key to move those anchors to where they're centered over the little flowers. And then get the selection tool, keyboard shortcut V. And now we're going to unlock the guides and select them and delete them. And that's all there is to making a color sheet using pattern brushes in Adobe Illustrator. In the next video, we're going to be looking at the width tool and how it can make your pattern brushes even more interesting. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, now's the time. While you're thinking about it, click that subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. Thank you for watching. Bye now.